The rain in Seattle didn't cleanse anything. It just made the grime stick harder to the marble steps of Evergreen Memorial Chapel, where 200 people in black pretended to mourn a man most of them had only known through quarterly earnings reports. Natalie Hartwell stood 3 feet from her father's casket, the mahogany gleaming under soft amber lights, and felt nothing but the hollow ache of 4 stolen years. She had lost 10 pounds since the phone call. The black dress hung loose at her waist, safety-pinned in the back where no one could see. 26 years old, and she looked like a ghost of herself, which felt appropriate because that's what she'd been to Robert Hartwell in his final years, a ghost he couldn't reach, a daughter erased by careful gatekeeping and changed locks. Movement caught her peripheral vision. Vivian Blackwood, her stepmother of 5 years, stood near the front pew checking her Cartier watch. Not discreetly. She tilted her wrist into the light, frowned at the time, then glanced toward the exit as if calculating whether she could leave early without causing a scene. Her Armani suit was perfect, her makeup flawless, her expression that of someone enduring a tedious business obligation rather than burying the man she'd married. Behind Vivian, her son Garrett leaned against a column, thumbs moving across his phone screen. He paused only to look up when a young woman in a tight dress walked past. He smiled. She smiled back. At his stepfather's funeral. Natalie's hands clenched. The program crumpled between her fingers. She wanted to scream, to grab Vivian by those perfect shoulders and demand answers. Why? Why cut me off from my own father? Why return my calls with silence? Why change the locks on the house where I grew up? But she knew why. Money had its own gravity, and Vivian orbited wealth with the practiced precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime studying trajectories. The service ended. People filed past the casket offering Natalie words that slid off her consciousness like oil on water. Sorry for your loss. He was a great man. He'll be missed. Empty syllables from empty people who'd never sat with Robert Hartwell at 3 a.m. while he taught his daughter how to read architectural blueprints, who'd never heard him laugh until he cried at terrible jokes, who'd never seen him cry real tears when he spoke about Natalie's mother. Vivian swept past without a word. Garrett followed, already on his phone again. They didn't look back. That was when Natalie noticed Harrison Wells standing apart from the crowd, the family attorney of 40 years, watching her with eyes that held something that looked almost like pity. He gave her the smallest nod, then walked toward his car. An invitation. A warning. She couldn't tell. But she would find out tomorrow when the will was read, and she would learn exactly how little her father had thought of her at the end, or so she believed. The offices of Sterling and Associates occupied the 40th floor of the Columbia Tower, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Seattle skyline and Puget Sound beyond. Natalie had been here twice before, once when she was 12, and her father brought her to sign papers for a trust fund, and once at 19 when she'd needed her birth certificate for college. Both times the office had felt like a place where serious things happened, where the machinery of wealth turned invisible gears. Now it felt like a courtroom. She took the seat farthest from the head of the conference table as if distance could protect her from what was coming. The leather chair was cold. The air conditioning hummed with expensive efficiency. Vivian arrived 10 minutes late, bringing with her the scent of Chanel No. 5 and barely concealed impatience. She didn't sit. She stood near the windows, scrolling through her phone with sharp, aggressive swipes. Garrett sprawled in the chair beside hers, legs extended, designer sneakers crossed at the ankle. He wore a white linen suit that probably cost more than Natalie's monthly rent. A small stain marked the lapel, coffee maybe, or wine from last night. He picked at his fingernails with a gold toothpick. Harrison entered carrying a leather portfolio that looked older than Natalie. He moved slowly like a man carrying something heavy he'd rather not deliver. He wouldn't meet her eyes as he settled into his chair. That was the first warning sign. The fluorescent lights caught the silver in his hair as he broke the wax seal on the envelope. Vivian stopped scrolling. Garrett sat up slightly. The room contracted into silence. Harrison's voice was gravel and regret. He cleared his throat twice before speaking. His hands trembled as he unfolded the document. Natalie watched his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. The words came out flat, professional, drained of all emotion. To my wife, Vivian, I leave the primary residence at Magnolia Heights Estate, including all furnishings, artwork, and vehicles contained therein. Vivian exhaled slowly. The house alone was worth $18 million. Natalie had helped pick out the curtains when she was 16 before Vivian, when it was still home. I also leave to Vivian the entirety of my stock portfolio and liquid cash in joint accounts totaling approximately $22 million. A sound escaped Natalie's throat, not quite a gasp, not quite a sob, something between the two. It wasn't about the money. She'd never expected the money. But the complete erasure of her existence, the total absence of even acknowledgement, struck like a physical blow. To my stepson Garrett Blackwood, I leave ownership of the Hartwell hotel chain and the vacation property in Whistler. Garrett pumped his fist once, then caught himself and forced his expression neutral. But his leg bounced with barely contained excitement. Harrison paused. He finally looked at Natalie. His eyes were sad, apologetic, haunted by something she couldn't name. And to my daughter Natalie. The room held its breath. I leave the property located at 47 Pinewood Road, situated in the unincorporated area of Cascade Valley. Silence. Then Vivian's laugh shattered it, high, sharp, cruel as breaking glass. Pinewood Road. You mean that old hunting shack, the one he bought to tear down 25 years ago? That condemned wreck in the middle of nowhere? Harrison closed the folder with quiet finality. That is the extent of the bequest. He slid a single rusted iron key across the polished mahogany table. It looked like something from a horror movie, all oxidized metal and ancient teeth. It scraped against the wood with a sound that made Natalie's skin crawl. Garrett's laughter joined his mother's. This is rich. Dad literally gave you a pile of garbage. That place is condemned, isn't it? Probably full of raccoons and black mold. Vivian gathered her papers with the satisfied efficiency of someone who'd just won a game she'd been playing for years. You'll have to pay property taxes on a rotting shack. He must have really hated you in the end, Natalie. I guess he finally saw you for what you are. What am I? The words came out before Natalie could stop them. Vivian paused at the door, looking back over her shoulder. A disappointment, sweetheart. A disappointment. They left. The door clicked shut with expensive softness. Natalie and Harrison sat in the humming silence of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city 40 floors below. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Mr. Wells. Why did he? Was he not in his right mind? Harrison stood slowly, like his bones hurt. He walked around the table and placed one weathered hand on her shoulder. The gesture was gentle, almost paternal. Your father was the sharpest man I knew, Natalie. Right up until the very end. He wrote this will 3 weeks ago when he was still walking, still thinking clearly, still very much himself. Then why did he hate me? He didn't hate you. Harrison lowered his voice, glancing at the door to ensure they were truly alone. He told me something when he handed me this file. He said Vivian looks at the price tag. Natalie looks at the value. He wanted me to tell you trust him. Go to the house. Natalie picked up the rusted key. It was heavier than it looked, cold against her palm. She didn't have $18 million. She didn't have a mansion or a hotel chain or a vacation home in Whistler. She had a rusted key, a broken heart, and a father who'd loved her once, but had somehow in those final years vanished behind walls she couldn't scale. The rain followed her out of the city. Cascade Valley lay 3.5 hours east of Seattle, deep in the part of Washington where the roads turned from asphalt to gravel and cell service died quiet deaths between the mountains. Natalie's Honda Civic, a 2012 model with 140,000 miles, and a passenger door that stuck rattled over potholes and groaned on the inclines. She'd left at dawn, unable to sleep, unable to think about anything except that rusted key and Harrison's words. Trust him. But how do you trust a ghost? How do you trust a man who'd let his new wife erase you from his life so completely that you couldn't even visit him in his final months? The memories came whether she wanted them or not. Age 7, sitting on her father's shoulders at Pike Place Market, reaching for a bouquet of sunflowers. Age 12, learning to drive in an empty parking lot. Her father's hand steady on hers as she gripped the wheel too tight. Age 16, crying about a boy who'd broken her heart. Her father sitting silent until she was done, then taking her out for ice cream and making terrible puns until she laughed. All of it before Vivian. Vivian had appeared at a charity gala when Natalie was 22, fresh out of college, working her first job as a junior structural engineer. She'd come home that weekend to find her father with a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, elegant, poised, beautiful, in that calculated way that spoke of personal trainers and dermatologists and stylists on retainer. This is Vivian, her father had said, and there was something in his voice Natalie had never heard before. Something like hope, maybe, or loneliness given a name. 6 months later, they were engaged. A year after that, married. And within 2 years, Natalie found herself slowly excised from her father's life. Calls went unreturned. Visits were postponed. The locks on the Magnolia Heights estate changed, and suddenly Natalie's key didn't work anymore. When she showed up unannounced, Vivian answered the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and explained that Robert was resting. He wasn't taking visitors. Perhaps Natalie should call ahead next time. Next time never came. The last time Natalie saw her father alive was 4 years ago at a restaurant downtown. He'd looked older, grayer, diminished somehow. He'd held her hand across the table and his eyes had filled with tears he didn't shed. "I'm sorry," he'd said, for what she'd asked. He never answered. 3 months later, Vivian had his phone number changed. The turnoff to Pinewood Road was easy to miss, a gap in the trees marked by a tilted wooden sign so weathered the letters were barely visible. Natalie almost drove past it. She braked hard, reversed, and turned onto what could barely be called a road. The Civic bounced and scraped over rocks and ruts. Branches scraped the windows with sounds like fingernails on glass. The trees pressed close tall pines and firs that blocked the sun. The air grew cooler. The gravel road stretched on for 2 miles of nothing but forest and silence. Then the trees opened up, and there it was. Victorian built sometime in the early 20s, maybe. 2 stories of what had once been beautiful architecture now sagging under the weight of decades of neglect. The roof dipped in the middle like a broken spine. The windows were boarded with plywood that had turned the gray of old bones. The porch listed to the left, half its boards missing, creating gaps like a smile with too many teeth gone. Natalie killed the engine. The silence rushed in immediately, total, oppressive, broken only by the caw of a crow somewhere in the trees. She stepped out. Her boots sank into mud. The smell hit her, wet pine, rotting wood decay, layered over decay. A condemned notice was stapled to the doorframe, half torn away by wind and weather, the words "structural hazard" still visible. This was what her father had left her. This wreck. This ruin. She walked toward the porch, testing each step before putting her weight on it. The wood groaned, but held. The front door was massive oak, scratched and gouged by animals or weather or time. She pulled out the rusted key, tried to fit it in the lock. It wouldn't go in. She jiggled it, tried forcing it. The lock was seized with rust, frozen shut. Perfect. Even the abandonment was broken. A sound behind her, a branch snapping, made her spin. An old man stood at the edge of the clearing, a double-barreled shotgun broken open over his arm, not pointing at her but present, a warning and a question both. He was maybe 75, weathered face like old leather, wearing a faded flannel shirt and suspenders. His expression was suspicious, guarded. Natalie's heart hammered against her ribs. She held up the key like a shield. "I own this place. My name is Natalie Hartwell. Robert Hartwell was my father." The man's expression changed instantly. Suspicion drained away, replaced by something that looked like shock, then sadness. He snapped the shotgun closed, not to aim, just to carry, and walked closer. "Tommy's girl." His voice was rough gravel over sand. "Well, I'll be damned. You've got his eyes. You knew my father? Know him?" The old man let out a dry chuckle. "I helped him pour the foundation for the shed out back 30 years ago. Name's Walter Brennan. I live just up the ridge. He told me you might come. Didn't think it would be under these circumstances, though. Sorry for your loss. Tommy was a good man. My stepmother doesn't think so." The bitterness in Natalie's voice surprised her. Walter looked at the house, then back at Natalie. "Don't judge a book by its cover, miss. Your daddy spent more time out here than he did in that fancy office of his, last few years especially. Doing what? Feeding the termites. Thinking." Walter walked up the sagging steps with the confidence of someone who knew where to put his weight. "And building. That lock's tricky. You've got to lift the handle while you turn." He took the key from her trembling hand, inserted it into the lock, lifted the heavy brass handle upward, and turned. With a groan of metal on metal that sounded almost alive, the bolt slid back. The door opened into darkness. "Be careful where you step. Floorboards are soft in the hallway." Natalie stepped inside. The smell was worse, mustiness, old paper, something metallic underneath. She pulled out her phone, turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through dust motes that danced and swirled in air that hadn't moved in years. The interior matched the exterior wallpaper, peeling in long strips, furniture covered in white sheets like corpses in a morgue. Bird nests in the ceiling corners, everything layered in dust, thick as carpet. No power. she said, her voice echoing strangely in the empty space. "Generator out back. I've kept it gassed up. Tommy paid me to keep an eye on things. Said keep it ready for Natalie. I'll go fire it up." While Walter headed around back, Natalie moved deeper into the house. Her footsteps echoed on floorboards that creaked and bent under her weight. She entered what must have been the living room. Above the fireplace hung a portrait of her father, or what was left of it. A diagonal slash ran across the canvas, but as she looked closer, she saw it wasn't a knife wound. Water damage, maybe. Age. But it looked violent. The mantelpiece held one object that didn't match the decay around it. A red envelope sitting in a perfect square of clean wood where nothing else was clean. Her name was written on it in her father's blocky handwriting, the same handwriting that had signed her birthday cards, her high school graduation card, her college acceptance letter. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The paper was crisp new. This had been placed here recently. The lights flickered once, twice, then the old chandelier overhead buzzed to life with dim yellow light. The house groaned as electricity flowed through wiring that hadn't carried current in years. Shadows retreated to corners. Details emerged, cracked plaster, broken furniture, signs of decay everywhere. Natalie tore open the envelope. Inside was a single index card covered front and back with her father's handwriting. "Vivian thinks wealth is what you show the world. I taught you that wealth is what you keep hidden. The house is a test, Natalie. If you sold it immediately, you would have gotten nothing. But since you're reading this, you came inside." You looked closer. "Now look down. Look down." Natalie frowned, reading the words again. She looked at her feet. She was standing on a dirty, moth-eaten Persian rug that might have been beautiful once, maybe 70 years ago. The pattern was barely visible under grime. Walter walked back in, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag. "She'll hold for a few hours long as you don't run everything at once." He saw the note in her hand. "He left you a map." He said, "Look down." Walter stepped closer, looked at the rug and smiled a knowing smile that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment. "Pull back the rug." Natalie knelt, grabbed the edge of the heavy Persian fabric and pulled. Dust rose in clouds that made her cough. The rug was heavier than it looked, decades of dirt adding weight. She dragged it aside, revealing the floorboards underneath. They were different from the rest of the room. Not the long vertical planks that ran through the rest of the house, but arranged in a herringbone pattern. And right in the center, one board had a small circular indentation, not a knot in the wood, but deliberate. A finger hole. "Walter, do you have a crowbar?" "Don't need one. That's a puzzle latch." Tommy loved his puzzles. Natalie hooked her finger in the hole and pulled. Nothing. She pushed. Nothing. Then, remembering Walter's trick with the door lock, she twisted. Click. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. A mechanical thunk from somewhere beneath the floor made them both jump. Slowly, with the hydraulic hiss of well-oiled machinery that had no business working after years of disuse, a 3-foot section of floor popped up on hidden hinges. A ladder descended into darkness. Not into a crawl space, the opening went deep. Air rose from below, but it wasn't the musty smell of the house. It was cool, dry, filtered. "What is this?" Natalie breathed. Walter leaned over the opening, grinning. "Well, I reckon that's where the real inheritance is." Natalie looked at the dark descent. Somewhere in Seattle, Vivian was probably popping champagne in the $18 million mansion, laughing about the ruined shack. Harrison Wells had gone home maybe, or to his office, wondering if he'd done the right thing not telling Natalie more. But here in this dying house in the middle of nowhere, her father had left something hidden, something worth protecting with puzzles and passwords written in his own hand. "I'm going down." She put her foot on the first rung. The metal was cold solid. She descended into darkness, each step taking her further from the world she knew and closer to whatever truth her father had been keeping. The ladder went down 30 feet into cool earth. Above, the square of yellow light from the living room grew smaller, like a dying star. Natalie's boots finally touched concrete. She fumbled along the wall until her fingers found a heavy industrial toggle switch. She flipped it. With a deep electrical thrum overhead, fluorescent lights flickered on, one by one, illuminating the space below. Natalie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. This wasn't a storm cellar. This wasn't a wine cave or root cellar or any kind of storage she'd ever seen. This was a vault, professionally built, climate-controlled, deliberately hidden. The room stretched maybe 1,000 square feet, concrete walls reinforced with steel beams. The air was dry and cool, humming with the sound of high-end ventilation that had been running apparently for years. It smelled of ozone and paper and something else, the sterile smell of a place protected from time. Along the left wall stood floor-to-ceiling metal shelving units, industrial grade, stacked with heavy plastic bins. Along the right wall were filing cabinets, dozens of them all labeled with neat type tags. In the center of the room sat a massive desk made of glass and steel, with 3 computer monitors dormant in black sleep mode. Natalie walked to the nearest shelf, her footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. She popped the lid on the first bin. Vacuum-sealed bricks of cash, all $100 bills. She lifted one surprisingly heavy, maybe $10,000 in a single brick. The bin held maybe 50 of them. She opened the next bin. Gold bars, each one wrapped in protective cloth, dull and heavy and real. She lifted one, it had to weigh 20 pounds. There were 2 dozen more. The third bin held jewelry, her mother's jewelry. The sapphire necklace Vivian had claimed was lost during a move. The diamond brooch Natalie had worn to prom. Her grandmother's wedding ring. All of it here, preserved, protected. "Oh, Dad," her voice broke. "You didn't leave me nothing. You left me everything." She walked to the desk, her legs shaking. A leather notebook sat beside the keyboard. She opened it. Her father's handwriting filled page after page, not the shaky scrawl from the red envelope upstairs, but firm, precise, dated entries stretching back 3 years. March 12, 2021, transferred $800,000 to Cayman Islands via Shell Corp Alpha. Vivian thinks it's for expansion. It's for Natalie. April 4, 2021, liquidated vintage car collection private sale, $3.2 million cash. Told V I donated them to museum. She didn't ask questions. June 15, 2021, moved mother's jewelry to vault. V asking about it again. Told her it was stolen. She seemed almost pleased. Insurance payout. Natalie flipped faster, her eyes scanning entries. For 3 years, the exact period when Vivian had been isolating him, cutting Natalie off, Robert Hartwell had been quietly, methodically liquidating his empire, not losing his mind, not succumbing to Vivian's influence, moving his wealth brick by brick, bar by bar, into this hidden vault under a house everyone thought was worthless. She opened the filing cabinets, manila folders neatly labeled. Project Widow, Blackwood Connections, Evidence Vault, Contingency Plans, each one stuffed with documents, photographs, bank statements, recordings. Her hands trembled as she pulled out Project Widow. Inside were surveillance photos of Vivian meeting with men Natalie didn't recognize, bank transfer records, email printouts, a file labeled Insider Trading with enough documentation to fill a legal case. Blackwood Connections was thicker, diagrams showing money flow, business names, addresses in Vancouver. The words money laundering stamped across the top in red ink. Her father hadn't just hidden money. He'd built a case against his own wife. Natalie returned to the desk and plugged in the small silver USB drive that sat beside the keyboard. The monitors hummed to life. No password required, just a biometric scanner. She placed her thumb on the reader. Access granted. Welcome, Natalie. A video window popped up immediately, filling the center screen. Her father's face appeared and Natalie's breath caught. He looked thinner than she remembered, skin pale, but his eyes were clear, sharp, burning with an intensity she hadn't seen in years. He was sitting at this very desk. Natalie. The video. Robert leaned forward. If you're seeing this, then the vultures have picked my bones clean. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this in person. I couldn't risk them finding out. His voice was raspy but strong. He coughed once, composing himself. Vivian isn't just a gold digger, honey. She's a criminal, a corporate parasite. Natalie sank into the desk chair, unable to look away. About 3 years ago, I found out she was working with Christoph Volkov, my biggest competitor. They were leveraging my health issues to short-sell Hartwell Industries stock. She was betting on my death to make a fortune. The words hit like physical blows. And Garrett. Her father's expression hardened. He's been laundering money through the hotel chain for a criminal organization based in Vancouver. The hotels lose money every quarter, but somehow Garrett's personal accounts keep growing. I have the proof. It's in the files. Natalie felt sick. I couldn't divorce her. Robert's laugh was bitter. If I filed, she would have triggered clauses in our prenup that would freeze everything. She would have destroyed the company and your inheritance before the ink dried. So I played the fool. I let her think she was winning. I let her isolate me from you and God, Natalie. That was the hardest thing I've ever done." Tears streamed down Natalie's face. While she was busy measuring drapes for her new mansion, I was moving the foundation right out from under her. He smiled, mischievous, triumphant. "The will Harrison read today gave her shell companies. The stocks I left her worthless. I dumped the real assets months ago. The house on Magnolia Heights mortgaged to the hilt. The balloon payment is due in 30 days. Natalie laughed through her tears, a sound halfway to a sob. "She thinks she has $22 million. What she has is $35 million in debt." The video Robert leaned back. "But you, Natalie, you have this. The liquid cash in this room is approximately $48 million. Untraceable taxes paid yours. The gold is worth another $12 million at current market rates. The property deed is in the cabinet this house plus 50 acres conservatively valued at $8 million once you file for historical preservation." He leaned forward again, urgent. "But more important than the money, you have the files. Evidence of Vivian's insider trading, Garrett's money laundering, the bribes their associates took, and the big one, sweetheart, the one that makes everything else irrelevant." He paused for effect. "Vivian was never divorced from her first husband, Julian Cross. I have the marriage certificate from 2015. I have proof there's no divorce decree. Our marriage legally void. She committed bigamy. The will that left everything to my wife, Vivian. There is no such person." Natalie stopped breathing. "By law, everything reverts to you, my only legitimate heir. But don't reveal your hand yet." Robert's voice took on a commanding tone. "They'll come for this land. They think it's worthless. But Vivian is greedy. She'll want it for a tax write-off or development deal. When she comes, you'll be ready." He smiled, and it was her father's real smile, the one from before Vivian, before the empire, before everything went wrong. "I love you, Peanut. Give them hell." The screen went black. Natalie sat in the silence of the vault for a long time. The tears had stopped. Something cold and hard had settled in her chest where her heart used to be, not rage exactly. More like purpose. Clarity. She wasn't the victim anymore. She stood, grabbed a stack of cash, $10,000, and shoved it in her jacket pocket. She took the USB drive. She selected 3 files from the cabinet Project Widow Blackwood Connections and one labeled Julian Cross, Smoking Gun. "You okay down there?" Walter's voice drifted down from above. "I'm coming up. And I'm not leaving." She climbed the ladder back into the dying house. Walter stood there with 2 thermoses of coffee, looking at her with the satisfied expression of someone who'd kept a good secret for a long time. "Thank you," Natalie said, "for everything, for keeping this safe." Walter shrugged. "Tommy was my friend, best friend I ever had. He asked me to look after this place until you came. I gave him my word." Natalie looked around the ruined room, the peeling wallpaper, the sagging ceiling, the portrait of her father slashed by time. This house that everyone thought was worthless held more value than Vivian's mansion ever could. She pulled out her phone. Still no signal, but that was fine. She had what she needed. "I need to get to a town, find a lawyer who isn't afraid of wealthy people." Walter grinned. "I know just the person. Francine Mackenzie. She's made a career out of taking down the rich and powerful. Has an office in Bellingham. Can you take me there tomorrow? First thing." Natalie looked down at the floor where the hidden entrance lay concealed again under the Persian rug. Somewhere in Seattle, Vivian was celebrating. Garrett was probably buying something expensive and useless. They thought they'd won. They thought Robert Hartwell had been a fool, diminished by age and illness, controlled by a beautiful woman who'd wrapped him around her finger. They had no idea he'd spent 3 years building their prison. Natalie slept that night in the vault on the cot her father had set up. She read through files until her eyes burned. She learned things about Vivian that made her stomach turn. She learned things about Garrett that explained why he always looked so nervous, so twitchy. She learned that her father had been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers, and he'd set up this final move years in advance. She also found, tucked in the back of one cabinet, a leather-bound journal. Margaret Hartwell, Private, was embossed on the cover in gold letters. Natalie opened it with shaking hands. Her mother's handwriting filled the pages, not a daily diary, but letters written to Natalie, entries made during pregnancy and the first years of Natalie's life. June 3, 1998. "Doctor confirmed it today. Pregnant." Robert cried. Actually cried. big tough businessman reduced to tears of joy. We're going to be parents. I'm terrified and thrilled and so ready. March 15, 1999. Natalie Rose Hartwell born at 3:47 a.m. Right here at home like we planned. 10 pounds, 2 ounces, perfect. Robert cut the cord with shaking hands. He's been staring at her for 6 hours straight, afraid to sleep in case she disappears. I told him she's real, she's ours. She's staying. He just keeps crying happy tears. December 25th, 2000. Natalie's first Christmas. She's 18 months old and destroyed more wrapping paper than any human should be able to. Robert bought her so many toys, way too many, but his face watching her play was the real gift. This is what wealth means, not the money in the bank. This, right here, this moment. The last entry was dated February 2001. The doctors say I have weeks, maybe a month. The cancer spread too fast. I'm not afraid of dying. Okay, that's a lie. I'm terrified, but not for me. For Robert, for Natalie. She's so small. She won't remember me. But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's better to have no memory than to remember losing someone you love. Robert will remarry someday. He'll need to. Natalie will need a mother. I hope he finds someone kind. Someone who sees what I see in him, not the money or the power, but the man who cries at Disney movies and who spent 3 hours building a dollhouse because he wanted every detail perfect. I hope whoever she is, she understands what a gift this family is, what a gift he is. But I'm also leaving this diary because I want Natalie to know she was born from love. Real love. The kind that builds houses with your hands and reads bedtime stories until your voice goes hoarse. The kind that measures wealth in moments, not dollars. If you're reading this, my sweet girl, know that your mother loved you with everything she had. And your father does too. Never doubt that. Never. Natalie closed the journal and pressed her palms against her eyes, but the tears came anyway. Her mother had died hoping Robert would find love again. And he had, or thought he had, with Vivian, a woman who'd seen the gift and decided to steal it rather than cherish it. The unfairness of it crashed over Natalie in waves. Her mother deserved more time. Her father deserved better than Vivian. And Natalie deserved those 4 years she'd lost. But fair wasn't a word the universe understood. Fair was something you had to fight for, claw for, take by force from a world that gave nothing freely. The next morning, Walter drove her to Bellingham in his old Ford pickup. Francine Mackenzie's office was above a coffee shop up a narrow staircase that smelled of espresso and old wood. The door had her name in peeling gold letters, Francine Mackenzie, attorney at law. Inside, the walls were covered in framed newspaper articles. Lawyer defeats tech giant in landmark case. Local attorney wins $50 million settlement against developer. Mackenzie known as the Hammer for aggressive tactics. Francine herself was 58 with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked up from a pile of papers and studied Natalie with sharp, assessing eyes. "You're Hartwell's daughter. I saw the obituary. Sorry for your loss." "What can I do for you?" Natalie placed the files on the desk. "I need to destroy my stepmother. Legally." Francine opened the first file. Her eyebrows rose. She opened the second. A smile began to form. She opened the third and let out a low whistle. "Well, this is Christmas morning and my birthday combined. How did you get all this?" "My father collected it. Before he died." Francine looked up, respect clear in her eyes. "Your father was a very smart man, and very patient. This is enough to bury her 10 times over. But she has resources, lawyers, money. This will be a war. I'm ready for war." Francine leaned back in her chair, studying Natalie. "You understand what you're asking for? Once we file, there's no going back. She'll come after you with everything she has. She'll try to discredit you, destroy you, bankrupt you in legal fees. She already destroyed me. She took 4 years with my father that I'll never get back. She gets nothing else." Francine smiled. "I charge $300 an hour, but for this case I'll work on contingency. When we win, and we will win, I take 30% of whatever you recover. Deal, deal." They shook hands. Natalie felt the calloused grip of someone who'd fought a lot of battles and won most of them. "But there's something you need to understand." Francine's expression turned serious. "The legal system is slow. Vivian will get to enjoy her stolen money for months, maybe a year. She'll think she's untouchable. And that's when we'll hit her. When she's comfortable. When she thinks she's safe. Natalie thought about her father's video. Don't reveal your hand yet. Let them come to you. I can wait. How long? Francine looked at the files again. Give me 2 weeks to build the case properly. Then we'll need to find this Julian Cross character. If we can get him to testify that he's still married to her, the whole thing collapses. Everything she inherited becomes void. I'll find him. Natalie drove back to Pinewood Road as the sun set through the trees. The ruined house looked different now, not abandoned but sleeping, waiting. She parked the Civic and sat for a moment looking at the sagging porch and broken windows. Her phone buzzed. Signal must have returned somewhere in the last mile. A text from an unknown number. Must be Garrett. Vivian would never lower herself to text. Natalie. Mom and I talked. We feel bad about the house. Let us buy the land from you. $75,000 cash. You can get a fresh start. Think about it. She smiled. They were already circling just like her father predicted. Sensing opportunity, wanting to snap up the last piece for pennies, turn it into some tax write-off or development deal. She typed back, I need to think about it. It's all I have left of Dad. The response came immediately. Take your time. No pressure. We're family. Family. The word tasted like ash. Natalie got out of the car and walked to the porch. The door wasn't locked. She hadn't bothered. There was nothing to steal except secrets, and those were buried 30 feet underground in a vault nobody knew existed. Inside, she turned on the generator and descended into the vault again. She made herself dinner from the supplies Walter had stocked, canned soup heated on a camp stove, crackers, water. She ate at her father's desk, reading through more files. Contingency plans was the thickest folder. Inside were detailed scenarios, each one mapped out with Robert's methodical precision. If Vivian does X, respond with Y. If Garrett threatens legal action, use evidence Z. If they try to claim the house through eminent domain, file historical preservation with documents A, B, and C. He'd thought of everything. Every move, every counter-move, every possible attack. He'd built this 3 years ago and had been running the plays ever since, slowly, patiently waiting for the right moment. That moment was now, and Natalie was going to execute his plan perfectly. She fell asleep reading her father's notes, her head on the desk, surrounded by the evidence that would bring Vivian's world crashing down. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like whispers. Inside the vault, the ventilation hummed its steady rhythm, protecting the secrets it held. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight, for the first time since her father died, Natalie slept without nightmares. She dreamed of him instead, young, laughing, showing her how to read blueprints, teaching her that the strongest foundations were built in secret, that real wealth wasn't what you displayed, but what you protected, that patience was a weapon sharper than any sword. In the dream, he smiled at her and said, "Trust me, Peanut. I've got this." And finally, impossibly, she did. 3 days after meeting Francine, Natalie woke to the sound of heavy machinery tearing through the forest quiet. The diesel engine roar was unmistakable, industrial, purposeful, closing in. She scrambled up the ladder from the vault, still in yesterday's clothes, and reached the front window in time to see a yellow Cat D9 bulldozer rumbling up the gravel road. Behind it came a black Escalade and a sheriff's cruiser, dust clouds billowing in their wake. Natalie's pulse spiked. She grabbed the radio Walter had given her and keyed the mic. "They're here. Code red." Static crackled. "On my way. Bringing cavalry." The bulldozer stopped 20 yards from the porch, its blade lowered like a weapon. The Escalade door opened and Vivian stepped out, her Louboutin heels sinking immediately into soft earth. She didn't seem to notice or care, too focused on the house, with an expression that mixed disgust and determination. Behind her emerged a man in an expensive suit, probably her lawyer. From the sheriff's cruiser came Deputy Martinez, a young guy who looked uncomfortable with whatever he'd been ordered to do here. Martinez approached first, hat in hand. "Ma'am, I have a court order signed by Judge Morrison. This structure has been deemed an immediate public safety hazard. You have 10 minutes to vacate before demolition begins." Natalie stepped onto the porch, forcing calm into her voice even as adrenaline screamed through her veins. "On what grounds?" The lawyer stepped forward, smug behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Multiple building code violations, structural instability, environmental hazards including potential asbestos and black mold. The county has determined this property poses imminent danger to public safety." Vivian smiled, crossing her arms. "I told you, Natalie. It's a liability. We're doing you a favor. Let us demolish this eyesore and I'll purchase the vacant land for $50,000. Final offer. You can finally afford to move on with your life." Natalie didn't move. "You bribed Judge Morrison." Vivian's smile froze for half a second till enough. "Careful, sweetheart. That's slander. It's not slander if I have the wire transfer receipts." The color drained slightly from Vivian's face, but she recovered quickly. "Deputy, please escort her off the property so we can proceed." Martinez took one step toward the porch stairs. His expression was apologetic but resigned. "Miss Hartwell, I don't want to make this difficult." The sound of an engine screaming up the driveway cut him off. An ancient Ford pickup truck came barreling through the trees, cutting across what passed for a lawn and skidding to a stop between the bulldozer and the house. Mud sprayed everywhere. The driver's door kicked open, and Francine McKenzie stepped out, holding a sheaf of papers above her head like a battle flag. "Nobody touches this house unless they want a federal lawsuit shoved so far up their assets they'll need surgery to remove it." Vivian recoiled. "Who the hell is this?" Francine marched straight to Deputy Martinez and slapped the papers against his chest. "Francine McKenzie, attorney at law, and this is an emergency injunction from the Washington State Supreme Court overriding your local judge's demolition order on grounds of historical preservation pending architectural review." Martinez took the papers, scanning them quickly. His shoulders sagged with visible relief. Someone had just handed him a legal excuse to avoid doing something he clearly didn't want to do anyway. Vivian's lawyer snatched the documents from Martinez, reading fast. His confident expression crumbled. This can't be." "Can and is." Francine grinned, showing teeth. "The house was built in 1923 by Theodore Whitman, founder of Cascade County. It's eligible for National Historic Registry until the review is complete, which will take a minimum of 6 months. If that dozer moves 1 inch closer, I will sue the county, the construction company, and you personally, Mrs. Blackwood, for destruction of protected property and evidence." "Evidence." Vivian's voice rose half an octave. Evidence of what? Francine just smiled wider. Vivian turned purple. She stalked toward Natalie, heels stabbing the ground. Close enough that Natalie could smell her perfume, expensive cloying. Her voice dropped to a hiss meant only for Natalie. "You think you're clever. You think some bargain basement lawyer and legal tricks can stop me. I have millions, Natalie. Real money. I can bleed you dry in court fees before summer ends. I will bury you." Natalie leaned in, matching Vivian's whisper. "You don't have millions. You have debt. I know about the margin calls. I know the Whistler house is in foreclosure. You're not here because you hate me. You're here because you're broke." Vivian's face went from purple to white faster than blood draining from a wound. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. She staggered back a step, looking at Natalie like she'd just seen a ghost speak prophecy. "How? Who told you?" "Dad told me." Every word was a nail. "Get off my property." Vivian stumbled toward the Escalade, her composure shattered. The lawyer followed, confused. "We're leaving." "But Mrs. Blackwood, the order, I said we're leaving." The convoy retreated in chaos, the bulldozer groaning into reverse, the Escalade fishtailing on gravel. Martinez's cruiser following with lights off, everyone fleeing like Vivian's panic was contagious. When the dust settled, Francine walked over to Natalie and lit a cigarette, taking a long drag. "Kid, I don't know what you said to that woman, but she looked like she just saw her own autopsy photos. Beautiful work." Natalie's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "I told her I know she's broke." Walter emerged from the tree-lined shotgun over his shoulder. He must have been watching from cover. "Are we clear?" "For now." Francine exhaled smoke. "But you just poked the bear." "Natalie, a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind." "What's your next move?" Natalie pulled out the file she'd grabbed from the vault that morning. "Find Julian Cross." Francine took the folder, flipping it open. "Marriage certificate, Reno, 2015. No divorce decree." Her smile returned. "Oh, this is perfect. This is prosecutorial gold." "Where is he?" "Last known address is 3 years old. Reno, Nevada. But my father's investigator lost track of him after that. Then we find him." Francine ground out her cigarette under her boot. "I know a PI in Reno who owes me a favor. Give me 48 hours. The call came 36 hours later. Francine's voice crackled through Natalie's phone, triumphant. "Found him. Julian Cross, age 45, works as a small-time dealer at the Silver Strike Casino. Lives in a studio apartment on East 4th Street. Has a gambling problem and owes about $60,000 to various bookies. Is he willing to talk? For the right price, he'll sing opera. My guy says Cross is desperate. Vivian left him with nothing but debt. He's not exactly her biggest fan. Book me a flight. Already done. You leave SeaTac tomorrow at 6 a.m. I'm coming with you. The flight to Reno took 2 hours. Natalie spent them reading through more of her father's files on Vivian. The deeper she went, the more complicated the picture became. Vivian Chen, no Vivian Sterling before that, and Vivian Castellano at birth had grown up in San Jose. Father died when she was 12, heart attack at the factory where he worked 60-hour weeks. Mother worked 3 jobs trying to keep food on the table for Vivian and her 2 younger brothers. There were school records showing Vivian had been a straight-A student, scholarship offers to decent colleges, but no record of her attending. Instead, at 18, she'd started modeling for local department stores. At 19, a DUI. At 21, married to a man named Marcus Sterling, a day trader who'd made a small fortune in tech stocks. That marriage lasted 3 years. The divorce was ugly, accusations of infidelity on both sides, restraining orders filed and dropped. Marcus got the house. Vivian got nothing. Then came the lost years. Her 20s and early 30s were a patchwork of addresses, jobs that didn't last, relationships that flamed out, event planning, personal shopping, real estate sales. She was good at all of them, the records showed, made decent money, but never quite enough. At 35, she'd met Julian Cross at a Reno casino. He was a professional poker player, or that's what he claimed. They married 6 months later in a chapel off the Strip. The marriage certificate was in the file, crumpled and coffee-stained like it had been rescued from trash. The PI notes from 2 years later painted a different picture. Julian's poker career was mostly losses. He owed money to dangerous people. Vivian worked 2 jobs trying to cover his debts. There was a hospital record from a Reno ER. Vivian treated for a broken wrist and bruised ribs. Julian's name wasn't on the report, but the timing matched a period when his gambling losses spiked. 6 months after that hospital visit, Vivian disappeared from Reno, just vanished from Julian's life with no note, no forwarding address, nothing. The PI had tracked her to San Francisco, then Seattle, then to the charity gala where she'd met Robert Hartwell. Natalie closed the file and stared out the airplane window at clouds that looked solid enough to walk on. Vivian wasn't just greedy. She was terrified. Terrified of being broke again, of being powerless again, of being trapped in the kind of poverty that ground people down until there was nothing left but desperation. That didn't excuse what she'd done. Didn't excuse cutting Natalie off from her father, didn't excuse the fraud and the lies and the theft. But it explained it in a way that made Natalie's anger more complicated, less pure. Francine noticed her expression. Second thoughts? No. Just understanding the enemy better. Good. Understanding doesn't mean sympathy, and it sure as hell doesn't mean surrender. They landed in Reno at 9 a.m., rented a car, and drove to a diner called Lucky's on the eastern edge of town. The PI had said Julian ate breakfast there every morning at 10, regular as a metronome. At 10:05, he walked in. Julian Cross looked like disappointment given human form. Mid-40s, but could pass for 50, hair dyed an unconvincing black, wearing a polyester suit that had been cheap when new and was now just sad. He carried a racing form under his arm and moved with the hunched posture of someone who expected the world to hit him and was trying to make himself a smaller target. He ordered coffee and a donut at the counter, then took a seat in a booth near the back. Natalie and Francine flanked him, sliding into the booth from both sides before he could react. He jumped, spilling coffee on his sleeve. His eyes went wide with instant panic. "Look, I don't have the money yet. I told Tony I need until Friday. We're not with Tony." Natalie placed a thick envelope on the table between them. "We're here to offer you a job." Julian stared at the envelope, lifted one corner and saw the stack of $100 bills inside. His entire demeanor changed, the panic replaced by calculation. He smoothed his hair and sat up straighter. "I'm listening. Who are you?" "I'm Natalie Hartwell, Robert Hartwell's daughter." Julian's face went slack. "Hartwell. Oh, no. No, I don't want any part of that. That woman is dangerous. Vivian told me if I ever came out of the woodwork, she'd have me killed. Did you ever sign divorce papers?" The question caught him off guard. He blinked. "Divorce? That costs money. Lawyers' filings. No, we just went our separate ways. She said she'd handle the paperwork in Mexico. I figured she forged it. She forges everything. Francine pulled out her notepad, writing fast. So, to the best of your knowledge, you are still legally married to Vivian Sterling Cross. Technically, yeah, probably. Why, you going to arrest me for bigamy? No. Natalie pushed the envelope closer. I'm going to give you $50,000 right now in cash, and another $250,000 if you walk into a Seattle courtroom this Friday and tell a judge exactly what you just told us. Julian picked up the envelope, weighing it in his hands like he couldn't believe it was real. He looked from Natalie to Francine and back again. She's in trouble, isn't she? Vivian finally got pinched. She's about to lose everything, and I want you to be the one who twists the knife. Julian's laugh was bitter but genuine. You know what the worst part was? When she left, she cleaned out our joint account, $1,500, everything I had, left me a note that said, "Thanks for nothing. I had to sell my car to pay rent." He opened the envelope, counted $5,000 stacks with practiced fingers. For $250,000, I'll tell the judge I'm carrying her baby. When do we leave tomorrow? First thing. Francine slid a business card across the table. You'll stay at a hotel we book. You don't talk to anyone. Don't gamble. Don't do anything stupid. We own you until Friday. Understood. Julian pocketed the money and the card. Understood. They flew back that evening. Julian sat 3 rows behind them on the plane, nervous energy radiating off him like heat. Francine spent the flight on her laptop building the legal case, muttering to herself and occasionally cursing. Natalie watched the desert give way to mountains, give way to the green of Washington, thinking about Vivian's face when she saw Julian walk into that courtroom. The sweet taste of revenge was undercut by something else, a hollowness she hadn't expected. This wasn't making her father come back. This wasn't giving her those 4 lost years. This was just justice. Cold, necessary, but ultimately empty of the satisfaction she'd imagined. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number, definitely Garrett this time. Natalie, we need to talk. Call me. It's important. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. She picked up. Natalie, his voice was shaking. I need help. I'm the last person who can help you. You don't understand. They found out. The people I was working with, they know about the lawsuit. They think I'm going to flip on them. They're threatening my mother. That's not my problem. Please. He was crying now, actually crying. I didn't want to do any of this. The money laundering, the fraud, I was in debt to these people. They said either I helped them or they'd hurt Mom. I did it to protect her. Your mother is a grown woman who made her own choices. She's still my mother. And whatever she did to you, to your dad, she doesn't deserve to die. Natalie closed her eyes, thought about her mother's diary, about the hope that Robert would find love again, about the woman who'd written those words, never imagining her husband would end up with someone like Vivian. But Garrett wasn't Vivian. He was a kid, 23, stupid, manipulated, who'd made terrible choices trying to save someone who wouldn't save herself. What do you want from me? Help me cut a deal. With the FBI or whoever. I'll testify against everyone, the Vancouver people, Mom, all of it. Just, please, help me get out. Natalie sat down. This wasn't in her father's plan. Robert had left evidence to bury them both. But sitting here listening to Garrett sob, she couldn't help thinking about the boy who'd once been 7 years old, watching his mother struggle and fail and struggle again. I'll talk to my lawyer. No promises. Thank you. God, Natalie, thank you. She hung up and immediately called Francine. The lawyer listened without interrupting. This is unexpected. Francine's voice was thoughtful. If Garrett flips, we get everything. Full testimony about the money laundering, names of everyone involved. Maybe even more dirt on Vivian we don't have yet. But it complicates the narrative. Juries like clear villains. If we paint Garrett as a victim too, it muddies the water. He is a victim, just not an innocent one. Natalie found herself defending someone she'd hated 3 days ago. He made bad choices. But Vivian manipulated him. She's the architect. Francine was quiet for a moment. Your father wouldn't have done this. He wanted them both destroyed. My father's dead. I'm not. And I'm the one who has to live with these choices. All right. I'll reach out to the FBI. See if they're interested in what Garrett knows. But Natalie, if we do this, we lose leverage against him. You understand that? I understand. Do it anyway. That night, Natalie couldn't sleep. She paced the vault, reading and rereading her mother's words, her father's plans, trying to reconcile mercy with justice, trying to figure out who she wanted to be when this was all over. The woman in her mother's diary had been generous, hopeful, kind. The woman in her father's video was strategic, ruthless, ready to burn bridges to protect what mattered. Natalie was both of their daughter. She had her mother's compassion and her father's steel. The question was which quality to lead with and when. Her phone buzzed. Text from Francine. FBI is interested? Very interested. They've been building a case against the Vancouver operation for 2 years. Garrett's testimony could break it wide open. They're offering witness protection in exchange for full cooperation. And the charges against him reduced to probation if his information checks out. He walks, essentially. Natalie stared at the message. Garrett would escape the consequences of his actions. He'd get a new life somewhere far from Seattle, protected by federal marshals, while Vivian faced the music alone. It felt wrong, it felt incomplete, but it also felt human, messy, and imperfect and real in a way her father's perfect plan wasn't. She typed back, "Tell them yes." But Garrett testifies against Vivian too. Everything he knows about her role in the fraud, already negotiated. He gives us Vivian on a silver platter. Then we have a deal. Francine's response came immediately. "I'm filing the lawsuit Monday. Court date will be set within 2 weeks. Julian's staying at the Fairmont under an alias. Everything's in motion. 2 weeks. 14 days until Vivian's world ended." Natalie should have felt triumphant. Instead, she just felt tired. She climbed out of the vault and walked through the ruined house. Moonlight through broken windows cast strange shadows. The portrait of her father watched her from above the fireplace, his face bisected by that water-damaged slash. She thought about what Walter had said that first day. "Your daddy spent more time out here than in that fancy office." This place had been his refuge, his reminder of what mattered before the empire, before Vivian, before everything got complicated. Maybe that's what he'd been trying to give her. Not just the money or the evidence or the means for revenge, but a way back to something real. Something that couldn't be bought or stolen or corrupted. Natalie walked outside and sat on the porch steps. The wood was rough and warped under her, but it held. Walter emerged from the tree line as he often did around this hour, checking the perimeter. Couldn't sleep. He settled onto the step beside her. "Too much thinking. Your dad used to do that. Sit right here sometimes for hours, just watching the trees, listening to the quiet." What was he thinking about? Walter pulled out a flask, took a sip, offered it to Natalie. She waved it off. He said he was thinking about who he wanted to be, said he'd spent so much time becoming successful he'd forgotten to think about whether he was becoming good. Was he good, I mean? Walter corked the flask and tucked it away. "That's not for me to say. But I'll tell you this, Tommy made mistakes, big ones. Marrying Vivian was probably the biggest. But at the end he tried to make it right, tried to protect you the only way he knew how, by leaving me a war to fight, by leaving you a choice." Walter stood, knees cracking. Whether to use his weapons or put them down, whether to become him or become better than him. That's the real inheritance, Natalie. Not the money, the choice. He walked off into the dark, leaving Natalie alone with the weight of those words. The next morning she drove to Seattle. Not to Francine's office or the courthouse, but to Magnolia Heights, the mansion she'd grown up in that Vivian had claimed as her prize. The gate was closed but not locked. Natalie punched in the old code, surprised when it worked. The gate swung open with a mechanical whisper. She drove up the long driveway past manicured lawns and imported sculptures to the house itself, all glass and steel and architectural pretension, nothing like the warm craftsman where she'd actually lived as a child. Vivian's car was in the driveway. A rental Bentley, the Escalade, must have been repossessed already. The debts were catching up faster than expected. Natalie walked to the front door and rang the bell. Chimes echoed inside, absurdly cheerful. Vivian opened the door. She looked terrible, makeup imperfect, for the first time Natalie could remember. Hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing yoga pants and an old sweatshirt. Her eyes were red. "What do you want to talk?" Vivian laughed, sharp and broken. "Talk? You sued me. You're trying to destroy me. What's left to talk about? Garrett's safe. I made a deal for him." Vivian's expression crumpled. She sagged against the doorframe. He's okay, witness protection. Full immunity if he cooperates. He won't see jail time." Vivian covered her mouth with both hands. Tears spilled over. "Thank you. God, Natalie, thank you. I didn't do it for you." "I know." Vivian wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "But thank you anyway." They stood there in awkward silence, separated by the threshold and years of damage that couldn't be undone. "Why did you do it?" Natalie finally asked. "Was it really just about money?" Vivian's laugh was bitter. "You wouldn't understand. You've never been poor. Really poor. The kind where you choose between food and electricity, where you lie awake wondering if you'll end up like your mother worked to death at 55 with nothing to show for it. So you decided to take what wasn't yours. I decided to survive." Vivian's voice hardened. "Your father had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. I thought, if I could just secure enough, I'd never have to be afraid again. But it was never enough." Vivian looked away. No, it was never enough. "You know what's funny?" Natalie felt something like pity stir in her chest. "My mother died hoping my father would find love again. She wrote it in her diary. She wanted him happy, and he thought he found that with you." Vivian flinched like she'd been slapped. "But you never loved him. You loved what he represented. Safety, security, an end to being afraid." Vivian's voice came out barely audible. "I tried to love him, at first, but then I'd see him and all I'd think about was the money. What I could do with it, how I'd never be vulnerable again. And the man just disappeared behind the dollar signs. You could have left. Divorced him honestly. He would have fought me. The prenup was ironclad. I would have gotten nothing. So you stayed and made his last years miserable. You took his daughter away from him." Vivian's face crumpled completely. "I know. I know what I did, and I hate myself for it. Does that help? Does knowing I'm drowning in guilt make any difference? No, but it makes you human instead of a monster. And that's something." Natalie turned to leave, then stopped. "The trial's in 2 weeks. I have enough evidence to put you away for 10 years, maybe more. Julian's going to testify you never divorced him. Your marriage to my dad was void. Everything you inherited reverts to me." Vivian slumped against the wall, sliding down to sit on the marble floor. "It's over." "Yes." Natalie walked back to her car. Behind her she could hear Vivian crying deep, racking sobs that echoed in the empty mansion. The sound followed Natalie all the way down the driveway, through the gate onto the street. She drove back to Pinewood Road with the windows down, wind tearing through her hair, trying to clear the heaviness from her chest. Walter was waiting on the porch. He took one look at her face and went inside, returning with 2 beers. They sat in silence, drinking, watching evening creep through the trees. "You went to see her?" It wasn't a question. Natalie nodded anyway. "Find what you were looking for? I don't know. Maybe." She paused. "I wanted her to be pure evil. It would make this easier. Life's rarely that simple. Dad's plan was simple. Destroy them both. Total victory. Your dad was thinking like a general." Walter tapped his beer against hers. "You're thinking like a human. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Doesn't feel wise. Feels complicated. Good. Complicated means you're paying attention to all of it, not just the parts that fit your story." They finished their beers as stars emerged overhead, countless and cold and indifferent to human drama. In 2 weeks, Natalie would walk into a courtroom and watch everything her father had built, both the empire and the revenge, reach its conclusion. Julian would testify. Garrett would be hidden away somewhere safe. Vivian would face justice. And Natalie would be left with this house, this land, and the question of what came next. Not revenge. She'd realized that somewhere between Vivian's tears and Walter's wisdom, revenge was just another kind of prison keeping you chained to the past. No, what came next was something harder, building something new from the rubble. Honoring the best of what her parents had been while avoiding the worst of what her father had become. That was the real test. Not whether she could win, she'd already won, but whether she could win without losing herself in the process. The question remained unanswered as Natalie descended into the vault one more time, surrounded by her father's carefully laid plans and her mother's gentle words, trying to find a path between ruthlessness and mercy, between justice and compassion, between the inheritance she'd been given and the person she wanted to become. On Monday morning, Francine filed the complaint. Natalie Hartwell versus Vivian Blackwood, case number C, V20248-472, Seattle Superior Court. The charges were extensive fraud, bigamy, conversion of property, unjust enrichment. The filing was a matter of public record. Within an hour, the news hit social media. Within 2 hours, every major Seattle news outlet was running the story. Daughter of real estate mogul. Sue's stepmother claims bigamy. Hartwell widow accused of fraud in explosive lawsuit. Fortune fights. Family feud erupts over $80 million estate. Natalie's phone exploded with calls from reporters. She ignored them all. Francine had prepared a statement. Ms. Hartwell is seeking justice for her late father and restoration of assets wrongfully obtained. The evidence will speak for itself in court. The court date was set. 2 weeks from Monday. Judge Patricia Chen presiding. 2 weeks of media frenzy. 2 weeks of Vivian's lawyers scrambling to find a defense that didn't exist. 2 weeks of Julian Cross in a hotel room rehearsing testimony he didn't need to rehearse because it was simply the truth. 2 weeks of Natalie reading her mother's journal, her father's letters, trying to understand the full weight of what she'd been given and what she was about to do with it. And then finally, inevitably, the day arrived. 2 weeks after Francine filed the lawsuit, 2 weeks of media frenzy, strategic silence, and Julian Cross rehearsing his testimony in a Seattle hotel room, the trial day arrived. Seattle Superior Court stood like a monument to order in a city built on chaos, all granite columns and marble floors polished to mirrors. Natalie arrived at 8:30 for the 9 o'clock hearing, Francine beside her carrying 3 briefcases stuffed with evidence that would dismantle Vivian's life piece by methodical piece. The media had camped outside since dawn. Cameras tracked Natalie's path from the parking garage to the courthouse steps, shouted questions dissolving into white noise. She kept her eyes forward, remembering her father's advice from when she was 12 and learning to give presentations. Look at where you're going. Not at the people watching you go there. Inside the courtroom was already filling. Curious spectators, legal observers, reporters who'd sweet-talked their way past security. Natalie took her seat at the plaintiff's table and felt the weight of their collective stare like physical pressure. At 8:50, Vivian entered through the side door with her legal team, 3 lawyers in suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, all moving with the choreographed precision of professionals who knew they were losing but refused to show it. Vivian wore navy Chanel pearls, hair perfect despite everything. But her hands shook as she gripped her purse, and her foundation couldn't quite hide the sleepless circles under her eyes. Their gazes met across the courtroom aisle. Vivian's expression was unreadable fear, resignation, maybe something like apology, all mixed together. Then she looked away, and the moment passed. At 9 sharp, the bailiff called the court to order. Everyone rise. Honorable Judge Patricia Chen presiding. The judge was 60, silver-haired, with the stern efficiency of someone who'd spent 30 years watching people lie under oath. She settled behind the bench, adjusted her glasses, and surveyed the courtroom with an expression that suggested she'd already read every document and formed preliminary opinions she'd be delighted to have proven wrong. We're here to address the probate of Robert Hartwell's estate and allegations regarding the validity of his marriage to the petitioner, Vivian Blackwood. Her voice carried authority that made the courtroom feel smaller. Miss Mackenzie, you may proceed with your opening statement. Francine stood, not bothering with notes. Your Honor, this case is about fraud perpetrated on a dying man. Robert Hartwell believed he was married to Vivian Blackwood when he wrote his final will. He was not. Ms. Blackwood was and remains legally married to Julian Cross, whom she wed in 2015 but never divorced. This makes her subsequent marriage to Mr. Hartwell void ab initio, rendering all bequests to my wife Vivian legally meaningless. The estate by law must revert to Mr. Hartwell's biological daughter and sole legitimate heir, Natalie Hartwell. Vivian's lead attorney, Maxwell Sterling, rose with practiced smoothness. Your Honor, these allegations are based on conjecture and documents of questionable providence. Ms. Blackwood and Mr. Cross separated amicably in 2018. While the divorce may not have been formally filed in the United States, it was processed in Mexico. Do you have documentation of this Mexican divorce? Judge Chen's tone was ice. We're working to obtain certified copies from Mexican authorities. So that's a no. The judge made a note. Continue, Ms. Mackenzie. Thank you, Your Honor. We have substantial evidence not only of the invalid marriage, but of Ms. Blackwood's fraudulent activities during her time with Robert Hartwell. She engaged in insider trading, conspired with competitors to short-sell Hartwell Industries stock, and systematically isolated Mr. Hartwell from his daughter to maintain control over his assets. Maxwell was on his feet again. Objection. These allegations are inflammatory and irrelevant to the narrow question of marriage validity. They establish motive. Your Honor, they show a pattern of deception for financial gain, and they're backed by documentation we're prepared to introduce. I'll allow it. But keep it relevant, Ms. Mackenzie. The morning proceeded like a chess match played by experts. Francine introduced the marriage certificate from Reno, 2015. Maxwell challenged its authenticity, forcing Francine to call a records clerk from Washoe County who confirmed its validity under oath. Francine submitted the will highlighting every reference to "my wife Vivian." Maxwell argued that Robert's intent was clear regardless of legal technicalities. By lunch recess, the battle lines were drawn but no ground taken. Judge Chen called for a 90-minute break and Natalie found herself in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse staring at a sandwich she couldn't eat. "You're doing great." Francine scrolled through her tablet reviewing afternoon strategy. "Julian's up first after break. He's solid, rehearsed, just needs to tell the truth and not embellish. What if Vivian's lawyers break him? They won't. He's got nothing to lose and 300,000 reasons to stick to the script." Natalie pushed the sandwich away. "I keep thinking about something Walter said, that the real inheritance is the choice. Whether to use Dad's weapons or put them down. You having doubts? No. Just wondering what he'd think of how I'm using them." Francine set down her tablet and leaned forward. "Your father wanted Vivian destroyed. Total annihilation. You've shown her mercy. She doesn't deserve getting Garrett immunity, not pressing criminal charges yet giving her chances to settle. You're already gentler than his plan. Don't second-guess yourself now." The afternoon session opened with Julian Cross taking the stand. He wore a suit Francine had bought him, nothing fancy but clean and professional enough. His hands trembled slightly as he swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, so help him God. Francine approached with the casualness of someone asking about the weather. "Mr. Cross, how do you know the defendant Vivian Blackwood? I was married to her in 2015 at the Little Chapel of Love in Reno, Nevada. Are you still married to her?" "Yes. Legally, yes. We never divorced." Maxwell was up immediately. "Objection. The witness is not qualified to make legal determinations. I'll rephrase." Francine didn't miss a beat. "Mr. Cross, did you ever sign divorce papers terminating your marriage to Vivian Sterling, now known as Vivian Blackwood, num? Did she?" "Not that I know of. She said she'd handle it in Mexico. I never saw any paperwork, never signed anything." Francine nodded and returned to her table, coming back with a document. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit C, a certified statement from Mexican civil authorities confirming no divorce decree exists for Vivian Sterling Cross in their records for the years 2015 through 2024. The judge accepted it, glancing through quickly. "Mr. Sterling, your witness." Maxwell approached Julian with the confidence of a man about to score points. "Mr. Cross, you're being paid for your testimony today, aren't you?" "Yes." "How much?" $300,000. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Maxwell smiled. "So you have significant financial motivation to say whatever Ms. Hartwell wants you to say." "I have financial motivation to tell the truth." Julian's voice was steady despite his shaking hands. "The truth is, I'm still married to Vivian. She abandoned me with $60,000 in gambling debt and never bothered to divorce me because she assumed I'd never surface again. She was wrong. You're a professional gambler. Correct was. Past tense. With a history of financial irresponsibility and dishonesty, Julian's jaw tightened. "I've made mistakes. Doesn't change the fact that I'm married to that woman and she knows it." Maxwell circled back. "Convenient that you only remembered this marriage when someone offered you money. I never forgot." Julian pulled out his phone before anyone could stop him. "I have proof." The courtroom froze. Judge Chen leaned forward. "What kind of proof, Mr. Cross?" He tapped the screen, turned it toward the court. A voicemail recording. "From Vivian. Year 2018 according to the timestamp." "Play it." The judge's voice carried authority that made the room seem airless. Julian pressed play. Vivian's voice filled the courtroom through his phone's speaker, tinny but unmistakable. "Julian, don't contact me again. I've found someone else, someone with actual money and prospects. You can keep the apartment, the car, everything. Just disappear. I don't need a divorce because I never reported our marriage to the IRS. As far as the government knows, we were never married. No one knows. Keep it that way and we'll both be better off." Silence crashed down like a physical thing. Every eye in the room turned to Vivian, who'd gone white as courthouse marble. "Your Honor, I'd like that recording entered as evidence." Francine was already on her feet. Maxwell recovered fast. That recording could be fabricated. It can be authenticated. Francine's smile was sharp as broken glass. Voice analysis, metadata verification, phone records. We can prove it's real. Judge Chen's expression had gone from stern to granite. I'll order authentication, but provisionally it's admitted. Mr. Sterling, unless you have questions that don't involve character assassination. Maxwell sat down, defeated. No further questions. The rest of the afternoon was procedural financial experts testifying about asset transfers, forensic accountants explaining the shell company's paper trails that led from Vivian's accounts to offshore havens and back again. Each piece of evidence another nail sealing the coffin. At 4:30, Judge Chen called a halt. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 9 for closing arguments. Until then, court is adjourned. The gavel fell with finality. Natalie made it to the hallway before her knees went weak. She leaned against a wall, breathing hard, while Francine fielded questions from reporters with practiced deflections. No comment. All evidence will be presented in court. My client is confident in the outcome. A hand touched Natalie's shoulder. She spun, expecting press, and found Garrett instead. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing jeans and a wrinkled shirt instead of his usual designer armor. I heard what you did. Getting me immunity. Natalie straightened, putting distance between them. Don't thank me. I didn't do it for you. I know. But I'm thanking you anyway. He glanced toward the courtroom. How's Mom sitting in there watching her world end? How do you think I tried to warn her? Years ago when this all started. I told her it would blow up eventually. She wouldn't listen. People rarely do when money's involved. Garrett laughed, bitter and broken. You know the worst part? I don't even like money that much. I just wanted her to stop being scared. She'd wake up at 3 a.m. checking bank balances, terrified it would all disappear. I thought if we just got enough, she'd relax. But there was never enough. There never is. Not when you're trying to fill a hole that isn't about money. He nodded, understanding passing between them, two children of damaged parents trying to make sense of inheritance that had nothing to do with dollars. I'm leaving tomorrow. FBI's relocating me to somewhere in the Midwest. New name, new life, all of it. Good luck. You too. He hesitated. For what it's worth, I think your dad would be proud. You're tougher than you look. He walked away before Natalie could respond, disappearing into the afternoon crowd, already becoming someone else. That night, Natalie drove back to Pinewood Road instead of staying in Seattle. She needed the forest quiet, the house silence, the vault darkness. Needed to be somewhere that felt real after a day of legal theater. She descended into the underground room and opened a file she'd been avoiding. Final letter. Inside was an envelope addressed to her in her father's handwriting, dated 2 days before he died. Her hands shook opening it. Dearest Natalie, if you're reading this, you've made it to the trial. You've used the evidence I left. You've fought back against Vivian's theft. I'm proud of you for that. But I'm writing this because I need to tell you something I couldn't say in the video, something harder than strategy or revenge. I made a mistake marrying Vivian, not because she was evil, though she turned out to be worse than I imagined, but because I married her for the wrong reasons. I was lonely, afraid of dying alone. I saw her charm and beauty and mistook them for your mother's kindness. Margaret would have seen through Vivian in 5 minutes. Your mother could always spot a person's true nature. I lost that ability somewhere between building an empire and becoming someone I didn't recognize. The house at Pinewood Road. I know it looks like punishment. Everyone will think I gave you garbage and gave Vivian treasure, but you understand value better than anyone I know. You got that from your mother. That house is where I was happiest, where your mother and I built something real with our hands, where you were born, where love existed before money complicated everything. I could have sold it 1,000 times. Developers offered millions for the land, but I kept it because it reminded me of who I was before I became what I am now. It reminded me that the best things in life can't be bought. They have to be built slowly with patience and care and love. I'm giving you the house because I trust you to understand what it represents. Not failure or abandonment, but foundation. A place to stand when everything else is quicksand. Use the money I left to fight Vivian. Use it to secure your future, but don't let it change who you are. Stay the woman your mother would have been proud of, generous, honest, strong in the ways that matter. And when this is over, when you've won, and Vivian is nothing but bad memory, decide what kind of person you want to be. Wealthy people have power, but they also have responsibility. Use yours wisely. I love you more than I ever found words to express. I'm sorry for the years we lost. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stand up to Vivian earlier. I'm sorry for 1,000 things, but I'm not sorry for this fight. You deserve everything she tried to steal. Take it back, and then build something beautiful with it. Your father. Robert. Natalie folded the letter carefully, tears dropping onto paper but not smudging the ink waterproof, of course, because her father had thought of everything. She sat in the vault surrounded by his careful preparations and felt the full weight of what he'd given her. Not just money, not just evidence, but permission to be both strong and kind, both ruthless and merciful. Permission to win the war without becoming the monster. The next morning's closing arguments were brief. Francine laid out the case with surgical precision: the invalid marriage, the documented fraud, the pattern of deception. Maxwell argued intent and good faith and the spirit of the law versus the letter. Judge Chen listened to both with the expression of someone who'd already decided but wanted to hear them make their case anyway. At 11:15, she rendered her verdict. Based on the evidence presented, I find that the marriage between Robert Hartwell and Vivian Blackwood was void ab initio due to Ms. Blackwood's existing legal marriage to Julian Cross. Therefore, all bequests to my wife Vivian in Mr. Hartwell's will are null and void. Vivian made a sound like something breaking. Furthermore, under Washington state intestacy laws, the entire estate, excluding the specific bequest of property at Pinewood Road already designated to Natalie Hartwell, reverts to Ms. Hartwell as sole surviving heir. This includes the Magnolia Heights property, all financial accounts, stock holdings, and business assets. The judge paused, looking directly at Vivian. Additionally, I'm referring this matter to the King County District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential criminal charges including fraud and bigamy. Ms. Blackwood, you are ordered to surrender your passport and remain in King County pending those proceedings. You should retain criminal counsel. Vivian's lawyers immediately surrounded her, speaking in urgent whispers. She nodded mechanically, all fight gone from her eyes. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. The media erupted outside the courthouse. Francine gave a statement about justice being served and her client looking forward to honoring her father's memory. Natalie said nothing, just walked to her car through a forest of microphones and cameras, got inside and drove. Not to Pinewood Road, to Magnolia Heights. The mansion sat empty, Vivian's rental Bentley already repossessed from the driveway. Natalie used her old key, surprised again when it still worked, and walked through rooms that echoed with absence. Staff had been dismissed weeks ago when Vivian's accounts froze. Dust already gathered on surfaces. The art was gone, sold to cover debts. The furniture remained expensive and cold and utterly without personality. This had never been home. Just a showroom for wealth, a stage set where Vivian had played the role of society wife while plotting her theft. Natalie walked to her father's office untouched since his death, sealed by Vivian, who'd had no interest in the books and files and memories contained within. She opened the door and found it exactly as she remembered from childhood visits. His desk, his chair, his shelves of architecture books and design journals. On the desk sat a framed photo she'd forgotten existed. Robert and Margaret, young and laughing, covered in sawdust and paint, standing in front of the Pinewood house mid-construction. They looked impossibly happy, impossibly whole, impossibly alive. Natalie picked up the frame and carried it out of the office, out of the mansion, back to her car. That was the only thing from Magnolia Heights worth keeping. 3 days later, she met with the board of Seattle Children's Hospital and signed documents transferring ownership of the Magnolia Heights estate to their foundation. Value $18 million minus outstanding debts. The hospital would use it as a rehabilitation center for pediatric patients recovering from major surgeries. Margaret Hartwell Memorial Center, the dedication plaque would read, "In honor of a woman who understood that home is built with love, not money." The press loved the story. Billionaire heiress gives away mansion to charity. Natalie ignored the coverage, too busy dealing with the logistics of inherited wealth, tax attorneys, financial advisors, estate managers, all the machinery required to manage $80 million in assets. She kept $40 million liquid in trusts that would generate income without requiring active management. The rest she divided into foundations. One for architectural preservation, one for women's health research, in her mother's name one for affordable housing construction. Garrett sent a postcard from somewhere in the Midwest, no return address. Just 3 words. Thank you. Good luck. 3 weeks after the trial, Vivian pled guilty to fraud and bigamy in exchange for a reduced sentence. 15 years eligible for parole in 10. Natalie attended the sentencing but didn't speak. Vivian did briefly, turning to face Natalie directly. "I can't undo what I did. I can't give you those years back with your father. But I want you to know I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Not because I got caught. Because I finally understand what I destroyed." The judge gave her 15 years anyway. Deputies led her away in handcuffs, and this time Vivian didn't look back. Natalie threw herself into work, her engineering job, the foundations, and the project that mattered most, restoring the Pinewood house. She hired the best historical preservation firm in the Pacific Northwest. They brought in specialists for the Victorian-era details, craftspeople who understood turn-of-the-century construction, architects who could modernize infrastructure while maintaining authenticity. The work took 6 months. Natalie spent weekends there watching the transformation. The sagging roof rebuilt with period-appropriate materials. The windows replaced with historically accurate replicas. The porch reconstructed from photographs and Robert's original blueprints. Walter helped when he could, teaching the younger workers techniques his grandfather had taught him: how to hand-cut mortise joints, how to mix plaster the old way, how to lay floorboards so they'd last another century. The house came back to life slowly, respectfully, like someone waking from long sleep. The house opened for a historical society tour on the anniversary of her father's death. 200 people came, filling every room, marveling at the preservation work. Natalie gave a speech about her parents, about building things that last, about the difference between price and value. A man approached afterward, mid-30s, wearing work boots and carrying rolled blueprints. "I'm Lucas Turner. I specialize in historical architecture preservation. This house is incredible work." "Who was the lead architect?" "My parents. And me, I guess. Following their original plans." His eyes lit up with genuine interest. "You're an engineer, then?" "Not just the heiress. Everyone's writing about structural engineer. The money's just a byproduct." They talked for an hour about load-bearing walls and period-appropriate materials and the challenges of modernizing century-old construction. When he asked if she'd like to grab coffee and continue the conversation, she surprised herself by saying yes. Coffee became dinner, became weekend hikes, became late-night conversations about what they both wanted to build with their lives. Lucas had grown up poor, putting himself through school, working construction, understanding in his bones the difference between houses built for showing off and homes built for living in. He got it. Got her. Got why she'd chosen a restored Craftsman over the Magnolia Heights mansion, why she drove a practical Honda instead of the luxury cars she could afford, why she wore jeans to charity galas and didn't care who noticed. They married 2 years later in the Pinewood house, standing exactly where her parents had stood in 1978. 50 guests, no press, just people they loved in a space built on love. Walter walked her down the aisle, 81 years old but steady as the house itself. 5 years after the trial, Natalie woke to her daughter's laughter echoing through the restored Pinewood house. Margaret rose. Maggie was 2 years old, running through rooms that had been rebuilt with love and patience and the kind of care that couldn't be bought. Lucas, her husband of 3 years, was making breakfast in the kitchen they'd renovated together. Natalie could hear him singing off-key, could hear Maggie giggling at his terrible attempts to flip pancakes. She walked to the porch where Walter sat in his usual chair, now 81, but still taking his morning coffee at the house he'd helped protect. He nodded toward Maggie, who'd escaped from the kitchen and was now chasing butterflies across the lawn. "She's got Robert's eyes." Walter's voice was soft with memory. And Margaret's laugh. "It's like hearing echoes." "That's a nice thought." "It's the truth." He rocked gently. "Your dad spent years trying to build an empire so he'd be remembered. But this," his gesture encompassed the house, the land, the child playing in morning sun. "This is the real legacy." Natalie thought about the vault beneath them, still there, but empty now, the cash distributed to foundations, the gold sold, and reinvested, the files archived with attorneys. All those weapons her father had left her used and then put away. She thought about Vivian in prison. Garrett somewhere in Iowa or Nebraska, living under a new name, Julian Cross, who'd taken his $300,000 and opened a small restaurant in Reno that against all odds was actually succeeding. She thought about the choice Walter had mentioned that night 5 years ago, whether to become her father or become better than her father. She'd chosen better, not by being softer or weaker, but by being complete. taking his strength and her mother's compassion and forging something new from both. Maggie ran up to the porch, hands cupped around something. "Mama, look." Natalie knelt down. Her daughter opened small hands to reveal a ladybug red wings bright against pink palms. "It's beautiful, sweetie. Can we keep it?" "No, baby. Beautiful things aren't for keeping. They're for appreciating and then letting go so they can be beautiful somewhere else." Maggie considered this with the seriousness of someone weighing deep philosophical truth. Then she blew on her hands, sending the ladybug spiraling up into spring air, and laughed as it flew away. Lucas joined them on the porch, sitting on the steps beside Natalie. The Historical Society called. They want to feature the house in their annual showcase again. We should do it. Natalie leaned against him, solid and real and present. "I think Mom and Dad would like knowing people are learning from what they built here." Speaking of building, Lucas pulled out his phone. "I got an email from a family in Spokane. Their grandmother's Victorian is about to be condemned. They're asking if we could help restore it. What's our schedule like?" "Maggie starts preschool in fall. But until then, pretty open. Then let's help them. That's what the money's for, building things that last." They sat together watching Maggie play, watching morning stretch toward afternoon, watching their daughter grow in the house where Natalie had been born and where probably Maggie's own children would visit someday. The inheritance wasn't the $80 million. Wasn't the mansion or the hotels or the empire her father had built and Vivian had tried to steal. The inheritance was this house, this land. The knowledge that the most valuable things couldn't be bought or stolen because they weren't things at all. They were moments and choices and the accumulated weight of small kindnesses compounded over time. Her father had understood that at the end. Had spent his final years moving money around, not because money mattered, but because it was the only weapon he had left to protect what did matter. To give Natalie not just resources, but choice. Not just wealth, but wisdom. And in the end, standing on the porch of the house her parents built with their hands, watching her daughter play in dirt and sun and safety. Natalie understood her father's final gift. He hadn't left her a ruined house instead of an inheritance. He'd left her the inheritance disguised as a ruined house, knowing she was the only one who'd see the difference. Knowing she'd choose foundation over facade. Knowing she'd build something real from the ruins. The greatest wealth wasn't what you accumulated, it was what you built. And what Natalie was building here, family home legacy, would outlast any empire her father had ever dreamed of creating. The breeze moved through the pines with the sound of whispered secrets. The house settled around her with the comfortable creaks of wood that had stood for a century and would stand for a century more. Somewhere in the forest, birds called to each other in languages older than money. And Natalie Hartwell sat in her inheritance, not the mansion or the millions, but this porch, this moment, this hard-won peace, and finally completely came home.